Lunar New Year. And so you can get some questions ready too. So this is fun. Thank you for joining. I'm sorry, this is really cutting into your like recovery from Zoom week, happy hour, 8 o'clock on a Friday. It's just not the time to do this, but appreciate everyone coming out for this.
Okay, we are live. So welcome everyone, as Nancy was saying. I just wanted to give you some technical information. We are going to have your camera off for the discussion, and then in the last 15 minutes, we're going to have a Q&A session. When we welcome you with your cameras, please stay muted throughout the session so we don't disturb our panelists. And if you have any questions, you can address them to me directly, or when the Q&A is coming up, Nancy will call on you. One more technical issue: if we have any interruption, as we have had in the past, I'm going to close the session, and I'll ask you to join the session again with the same link that you have come in. Hopefully that won't happen, but in case something like that happens, please do that. So without further ado, over to Nancy.
Thank you so much, Nico, and thanks everyone. Hey, Raymond, with all the fun people out there. Thanks so much again for joining us. And I'm Nancy Yao. That's my surname, class of 90, and it's super, super awesome that we're doing this all together today. And I have my classmate, Randall Ng, on the call with us today. And as I have people sort of introduce, you guys all got their amazing, overachieving resumes. I will put them in the chat box as a reminder of what they're doing. If I could put in the chat box, if I can, I might not be able to. But, you know, Randy is a composer and pianist. He's a tenure faculty at NYU at Tisch. And he's done some incredible work that he'll talk about. And then I'm also joined I'm going from oldest to youngest here, Jennifer Aitley, class of 94. Completely remember her from our date at Hunter. She is so many things. She's an entrepreneur. She's a documentary producer. She's like the most amazing emoji expert I've ever met, and a seed investor, a journalist. And I know her most from her incredible book and production, The Search for General Tso, which we showed at MoCA. And she also just is one of those fantabulous Hunter alumni that has this incredible background and has touched and changed things in everything she's done. And she self-described survivor of Hunter College campus schools. And Senator, congratulations, amazing, Michelle, class of 95. And she is the first Asian American, I believe, elected state senator in Georgia. If you're not, I'm correct, I think, in that. And so amazed, but also trained, of course, in something that has nothing to do with that particularly. She is an MD, and she also holds an MPH, both from Columbia. It's just so amazed with the work that you've already done, and the presence and the representation that you've, given to Asian Americans and all, underrepresented groups in the state legislature in Georgia. So thank you so much, Michelle. We're so excited to hear from you. So we're going to first start. This is how we're going to run this. So people ask all your questions, keep them in your mind. We're going to open it up in a little bit. But this is all the things you wanted to know about Lunar New Year that you were never able to ask, and all the things that we've wanted to share about being so Chinese American during the Lunar New Year and the questions that we've received. But one question I want to dive into is, it is technically called the Lunar New Year, but it's very popularized to be called the Chinese Year, in part because there are 25 million Asian Americans in the United States. The largest population within that is actually of Chinese ancestry, and that's about 6 million. And because the exuberance around the Chinese celebration of Lunar New Year, 15 days, it culminates at the end of the month with the Lantern Festival, and so many elements of that, and so much of the Chinese zodiac, compatibility, lucky things, unlucky things, colors you can wear, what you can say, the hongbao, the money you get. There's a lot of money associated with this, and all the happy idioms that you need to express to people you love and care for, and all of the tradition, mythology, and culture around the holiday, I think has really sort of mistakenly been then dubbed as the Chinese New Year. So my first question to our panelists is, what was your most memorable Lunar New Year tradition that you had, and do you still carry that out today with your own families? Michelle, you're nodding. I feel like you know what that is.
Well, this is a really interesting question. And I think it really gets at the heart of what it is to be a Chinese American, particularly what it's like to be a second generation Chinese American or first generation, depending on what kind of nomenclature you use. I feel like, my parents immigrated here from Hong Kong in the 1960s. They came here for college, which is probably a pretty common sort of story among our generation. And I always felt a little bit, we can talk about this issue more because I think this is a very interesting point. A little bit like I had a foot in both worlds, right? So when we bring up these issues of Chinese New Year, or Lunar New Year, which is one of the biggest holidays, obviously, that we celebrate, it always felt a little bit like I didn't feel like as good a Chinese person as I should be, because with my family, it always felt like on one hand, we observed all these traditions. We did the red packets with the money, and there were certain foods we would eat that were, auspicious, and we would do certain things, but we didn't go the full length that other Chinese families would do who were maybe closer to that point of immigration. And it always felt like this balance of how to forge being a Chinese American or Chinese person, and also being an American teenager, and how it was to balance those two competing cultures in that way, and feeling a little bit foreign to both. And I always apologize to people for feeling like I'm not a good Chinese person, because I don't always know all the ins and outs of the traditions. My grandmother would always tell us, she had the Chinese calendar that's like square and has a lot of little writing on it. And every day I would do something or choose a date for something, she would tear it off and say, this is an auspicious date for this and that. And this is what color you should wear. And these numbers are lucky on this day. And it felt a little bit foreign to me, but I also wanted to learn more about it. So like that tension of wanting to be more Chinese, but also wanting to be an American was always at the forefront, especially when I was growing up and when I was at Hunter.
Jennifer, you know a lot about Chinese American culture. Your expertise is so well known in the food area. What were things that you did that you still carry forward today?
Yeah. So the short answer right now is I don't carry that much forward. But back then, for Chinese New Year and Lunar New Year, actually the main way that we would celebrate is that it was in elementary school, because I went to Hunter Elementary School, we would bring a bunch of things for all my classmates, because when I was in elementary school, I think in a class of, in a grade of 50, there were maybe there's 3 Asian Americans, 2 Chinese Americans, and 1 Malaysian Chinese American. And so, for Chinese New Year, my parents would make fried rice, and we would bring in, little plates and little forks, and then we would get the hong bao. And instead of putting money in there, we would take the red candy and the silver wrap, kind of the shiny silver wrappers, and then that was sort of so most of our Chinese New Year celebrations was mostly performative on behalf of the mainstream whitish culture, which is fine. And in terms of, from a personal perspective, I probably 90% of the Chinese American girls in this country took dance lessons and learned to twirl silk ribbons. So my sister and I actually took Chinese folk dancing throughout most of our childhood. So there was always this big Lunar New Year celebration with all of the area's Chinese American kids. I went to a school called Columbia Chinese School, which also did a lot of work with Bergen Chinese School and Rockland Chinese School, and you would learn lion dancing and whatever dance of the year we were assigned in our age cohort. Over time, though, in terms of what we brought in high school, the thing that I learned to make was turkey dumplings, right? Because you can't get ground pork in American supermarkets, but you can get ground turkey. So we learned to make do with dumplings with what you could buy downstairs in the supermarket, right? So it was ground turkey, and then you get lettuce instead of bok choy, because you could not get bok choy in the Upper West Side supermarkets back in the 1980s and early 90s. And then the secret ingredient that since turkey is kind of more dry and less flavorful than pork, is ketchup. You put a lot of ketchup, and that is how you make the dumplings taste
That
good.
sounds horrible.
Oh no, it's so good. No, ketchup isn't. I mean, catch-up is originally Asian. I think it's, you know, there are many kind of things that, you know, in terms of going backwards, but it's, you know, an earlier version of it came from Malaysia, or ketchup. And it evolved into Heinz, but like there were many steps in between. But it is an amazing condiment. I just have to say, like, you know, I put it like into the hamburger mix, into the turkey mix. Like if you ever have ground meat of any sort, like lots of ketchup, like squeeze a bunch of ketchup and then squeeze more, like that, and then it'll turn out to be very flavorful.
And it's the
So.
red color. It must have been that you were probably drawn to the red color.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Ketchup is amazing.
This is, this is so awesome. Thank you, Jennifer. And Randy, I know for a fact that you know how to do Asian American dances, and Chinese Culture Club was a big part of our.
Yes. No, I think, were you OA, it was it known as OAS back then? ACS. Were you like the president of
No,
OAS?
it wasn't me. Don Lee was the president.
Oh, I do.
I
remember Don Lee.
But Randy, did you, I mean, you know, tell us about your experience. I'm curious what you're going to say.
So like when I was in elementary school, I remember this time of year and actually being scared of it. Because like I went to an elementary school that was like really white. And I knew like Chinese New Year is going to come around, and then like a certain amount of attention was going to be placed on me that I did not welcome. But I remember, you know, going into I'm from Staten Island, and my mom grew up in Chinatown, and my grandparents were still there, so we would go in when we were young and hang out with them on Chinese New Year. My grandfather like knew everybody in Chinatown, so we just like walk around and like everyone would hand me money, which was great. But yeah, and then, you know, I went to Hunter and a lot of things changed, and we'll probably get into this later when we talk about you know, the Hunter kind of impact on our own sense of Chineseness. But I didn't really do that much with Lunar New Year for a while until I had my daughter, who is now an 8th grader at Hunter. You know, she's having a very different experience than I did in terms of her own sense of Chinese American identity. But the thing that we started to do together was go with my dad to his Chinese American Club of Staten Island banquet every year, which is usually, it's either on Staten Island or in Brooklyn. And it's just like this lovely community event, which is like lots of like 85-year-old women like doing dances very slowly. And you like think that they're gonna fall over and like break 800 bones, but somehow they managed to do it, and singing karaoke and having a banquet. And it's I love doing that with my daughter.
I love all of those. Thank you so much for sharing all of those details. And, you know, just kind of like moving a little bit into, you know, I was struck by something Michelle said, and, you know, the assumption that we should know this culture, you know, and yet we're like, wait, we're American, and, you know, we are made up of all these different components. And, you know, I almost equated to, you know, people who are Chinese ancestry, that they should understand US-China bilateral relations, or that, you know, it's the same assumption that like, I know Kung Fu, or I know how to do anything, or I know how to make Jennifer's dumplings. I don't. Those are, I will never make that filling.
Oh, it's good. I'm
gonna try. You're a professional.
I'll send you the recipe. I have a whole recipe about like how to cook Chinese dumplings from Costco. Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing. And I guess, you know, just moving to your, you know, your day jobs and how you see that Chineseness, I guess, especially in the climate right now, where given some of the stoking by the former administration, and thinking a lot about xenophobia and anti-Asian American racism, and terrible video depictions of elderly being shoved and pushed, which on social media is just, you know, unbearable. But then also knowing that this has happened repeatedly through our own lives, you know, this isn't something new. And even those bizarre positive stereotypes around, you know, the Lunar New Year and Chinese New Year, and needing to know the answers around all of this cultural stuff, and not letting you develop your own identity fully in the sense. And I think, you know, some of you know Jay Caspian Kang's written for the New York Times about the Asian American identity and how suppressed it is in different ways. And just wondering how you guys think about your own work, and if Chineseness has infused in any way into it. Or is it something that you have just been able to sort of say, that's just a part of my makeup? or is it something that, you know, really is a fundamental thing that you're highlighting in a compartment? And Randy, I'm going to start with you because I know that some of your work that you've thought about in this space.
Yeah, I mean, I guess recently in my career, it's in the last 10 years, I've become more interested in really exploring this part of my identity and what I write about. And, you know, I'm a composer, so it's like this super abstract thing, like how do notes on the page like connect with any sense of, you know, anything tangible. But because my mind is not that abstract, I usually work with text. So I'm primarily an opera composer, and if not that, then vocal music. So the kind of music I write is not really that influenced by Chinese music, because I didn't grow up with that. And this is, again, this kind of like dual thing that we're starting to talk about. So like Chinese music is not in me, but Chinese-ness is in me. So like sometimes people hear my music and they're surprised by that it's not like, you know, serene and cyclical and, you know, non-goal oriented and stuff like that. It's actually most of my music is fairly rhythmic and aggressive, and it's highly influenced by jazz. So that's not the way in for me, but subject matter is starting to become more the way in for me. I worked on a project with Nancy a couple of years ago. I got commissioned to write a piece for a choral piece for a concert that was going to be about immigration. So I started to think about my own parents' immigration stories. I knew I wanted to do something with the museum, so I went down to Nancy's museum and saw the exhibit Fold that the Gold Adventure survivors had created, these amazing paper sculptures, and was really inspired by that, and even more so by what they had chosen, the curator of the exhibit had chosen to put in the program, which was some actual, instead of doing things about, you know, the amazing artwork, he put practical advice for immigrants who are stopped by ICE. It was like, this is an immensely kind of moving kind of connection of art and what we can do in the world. That choice to make that the program. So I set that program for this choral, for this chorus, and it was like, you know, 80 people singing about what to do if you're stopped by an ICE officer. It was really kind of meaningful experience to me, and so that's like one thing that I'm doing. I have another project that I'm talking with Nancy about as well, about a song cycle thing that I want to do to trace the Chinese American male experience over the last 100 years, just kind of dropping in and like seeing how things have evolved. So those are kind of some of my projects.
So fun. And Jennifer, you're touching in so many different ways. Do you want to share a little bit about?
Yeah, I mean, my Chineseness kind of informs all kinds of things. Obviously, you know, I did a book on Chinese food in America called The Fortune Cooking Chronicles, and produced a documentary called The Search for General Tso. And then that informed, you know, my emoji activist fight for the dumpling emoji, which I was shocked to learn did not exist as of 2015, because, you know, dumplings are not only Chinese, but they're sort of this universal food, whether or not pelmeni or ravioli or pierogi or momos, you know, this idea of like yummy goodness inside a carbohydrate shell, whether or not baked or fried or steamed, like that is a universal thing. And then emoji are sort of this universal thing. And the fact that there was no dumpling emoji, in my mind, meant the system had failed, and I was like on a mission to fix it. And so among the emoji that we got added were dumpling, takeout box, fortune cookie, and chopsticks. So on behalf of all the Asian food lovers out there. And then in a separate generation of the ones that are holiday related on your phone, we got, let's see, Tongbao, the Chinese, the red envelope, the firecracker, and then the mooncake, which is like, you know, taste like hockey pucks. They look like hockey pucks and they taste like hockey pucks, but nonetheless are very important culturally. So we worked with Baidu in order to get those proposed to the Unicode Consortium. I co-founded a group called Emoji Nation, whose motto is emoji by the people for the people. And it basically advocates for more inclusive and representative emoji. And then, you know, there are other, and Chineseness touches my life in other ways. I do a lot of work in fiction, literary fiction publishing, and a lot of the, in terms of the voices that are available in literary publishing versus Hollywood writ large, it's a lot more diverse because there's so many more bets. Like you have probably 2 orders of magnitude more bets in publishing than you do in like for film. Like in a good year in terms of mainstream films that hit like a theater, you're in the low hundreds, or if this is in the before times. Whereas for publishing, you have thousands, high thousands, maybe like low, maybe even breaking into that 5 figures at like sort of 10,000-ish in any given year. And as a result of that, you have so many more bets. The bets are smaller, but then they don't have to be only appealing to the mainstream. And as a result, we work with a lot of Chinese American, Asian American, Nigerian American, all kinds of writers with different voices that can be shared and kind of amplified through publishing much easier than you can in Hollywood, because the cost of writing, the cost of printing is like so much cheaper than actually making like writing a script, that doing production and then like doing all the marketing. In some ways, I think literature has been one of the most fertile areas for voices of our generation, which is sort of like the post-19, many of us are of the post-1965 immigration reform act generation, and it's great to see those voices come through in publishing.
Thank you for doing all of that. I mean, you're such a pioneer in this space, and to be included in that and with some Chinese American components is so fun. And it's very accessible. I feel like there are areas where maybe there's not enough Asian American representation or Chinese American representation, and you're doing things in such an accessible space and popular space, and it really resonates, exponentially. Michelle, Dr. Al, you so many things in community health and access. Have you thought about Chineseness in pediatrics or anesthesiology, or now as a public servant?
Absolutely. Well, first I want to say, Randall, Jenny, Nancy, you guys are so awesome, right?
Oh.
You guys have done such a diversity of work in all different spaces. And it's really important because it really shows that Asian people and Chinese people belong everywhere, right? Like that we represent in all corners of industry. I do 2 very different things. Maybe they're not that different. They do overlap somewhat. So, like my main job, my day job is to be a doctor. And I think that's like the most like normal thing, right? It's almost like I joke about it this, like I did the correct like Chinese kid thing, is that you go to school and you get good grades and then you go to med school and then your parents are happy, right? So that's a pretty straightforward thing that I do, and it's very fulfilling. Chineseness does inform it in some way, in that I think about cultural issues and cultural competency when I take care of patients. But what I'd like to talk about more a little bit is the sort of social aspects of it and how this informs what I do in the state legislature. So I am the first Chinese person to serve in the Georgia General Assembly, I think, ever. Sometimes this statistics are a little bit hard to figure out, but we've looked back a couple of decades, and I think that if there hasn't been a Chinese American in the last 20 years, we're pretty safe in saying there has not been a Chinese American serving in the Georgia General Assembly ever. So that's very meaningful to me, not just personally, but just as a way of showing really the country the way that Georgia is changing, right? That the face of Georgia is diversifying, and that the representation of Georgia is changing over time. Obviously, Georgia's been in the news a little bit more this past election cycle. She understated with the way that Georgia has flipped, and the way that, especially with this runoff election, that we can see the way that Georgia is changing rapidly. And a lot of that has to do with the rapid diversification of the suburbs north of Atlanta, where I live, and especially the growing Asian population here. I think one thing that I've thought about, not just since I've been a state senator, but even this past year, especially with the Black Lives Matter movement that really came to sort of a peak over the summer, is the way that these social issues give us cause to look at sort of the pernicious effects of this model minority stereotype that we've all been aware of and lived with, and the way that it tends to set our communities, like the Asian communities, apart from other communities in a way that is harmful. It drives a wedge, sometimes I think, between us and other groups in this country to what I think is a mutual disadvantage, right? Because I think that oftentimes Chinese Americans, Asian Americans in general, are held up as this sort of exemplar of immigrant groups that have achieved success through, you know, whatever people attribute it to, family structure, educational attainment, work ethic, whatever people say, right? And sometimes I feel that conservative groups, and I say this as someone who lives in a still somewhat more conservative state, they hold up this Asian American experience as a way to prove that systemic racism and social disparities can't possibly exist in our country, right? Or that there's a way to overcome these systemic barriers by doing things, quote, the right way, right? And they sometimes use Asians as a way to prove that there is a right way to do it. However, we know that success is not just determined by doing things the right way. And I think that we know the systemic discrimination and implicit bias are rampant in American society, and all we have to look at now that we're talking about this rise of Asian American discrimination and violence that we've been seeing more and more, especially in the Bay Area, and attacks on our Asian elders, to get the sense that this sense of Asian American sort of acceptance, or this like sense of us being like almost white, was sort of like a provisional sort of acceptance, and all it took was something very random to set us apart again, right? Like the fact of the pandemic does not have anything in particular to do with our Asianness, but it doesn't take much for people to use that as a way to drive a wedge between us and you know, the standing general community. So I think that this is a good opportunity now that we're talking about Asian discrimination and using it as a way to power our work forward, to take that Asian community and to sort of use it to fight against general discrimination against other groups also, and to not have it set us apart, but realize that we're all in the same fight together for social justice, and to realize this is the fight that we're all in together.
I love that so much. And in fact, I was just in a moderated conversation with Senator May YIH, who was in fact the first Chinese American elected senator from Oregon. She was based in Albany, and she's now 93 years old. And, you know, she just said, if I could do it at 48 to run for something, you know, a lot of times there are barriers to entry in our own minds, the inability to make a difference. And she said, just, you got to go knocking on doors, and you need to be a public servant. So, you know, thank you for carrying that, continue to carry that baton forward and that torch forward. Just thinking a little bit about, you know, the world that we currently live in. I guess I was surprised and kind of moved by President Biden's Lunar New Year, like remarks with First Lady Joe Biden. And again, like, it actually annoys me that it's so Chinese. Like, everything that people do, they're like, okay, I know how to say gong hei fat choi, so let's just go with that. But let's call it the Lunar New Year, and sort of make some sort of apology that, like, I need to learn it in Korean, or, you know, whatever other language. Vietnamese, Tibetans also celebrate the Lunar New Year. So what was your take on that? And also on, I think for the first time since Johnson, you know, President Biden really making some very, very clear statements around Asian Americans and upstanding for Asian Americans, and Vice President, you know, Harris also, you know, being very vocal about it. You know, Jennifer, you're ready. So Jennifer, Randy, then Michelle.
Oh, you know, I was going to say, my observation, I was going to type it into the box. I think, are we still, I'm going to ask Michelle this, in terms of the cabinet level, I think there are no, I know, Asian Americans. I think some folks are upset. I don't know if that's changed right now. Obviously, Vice President Harris is sort of above, you know, the cabinet level. But while I did appreciate, you know, the Lunar New Year kind of statements, I'm kind of curious. I think this may be like the first cabinet in a couple of cycles, maybe not to have an Asian American. Someone should correct me if like some announcement has been made recently that I like missed. Oh,
Catherine Tides, she's Chinese American.
Is that cabinet, and they made that a cabinet level position, which is?
It's not, is it considered cabinet? I don't know if it's cabinet.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Yeah,
Thank you,
they vary. They vary.
Hunter alumni. Good knowledge.
Good. Oh, good. That is the cabinet level.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, so Randy and Michelle.
Oh yeah, I mean, you know, after the exhaustion of the last 4 years, I mean, it's just nice to be recognized. I mean, we'll have to see if if substantial change happens after that. But I just like to not be either demonized or ignored or be used as a wedge, as Michelle was so beautifully saying before, towards other communities. It's a relief.
I think our bar has been recalibrated to be exceedingly low at this moment, right? We've lived 4 years of it just being normal business as usual to hear the president of the United States calling a virus, which does not discriminate, the China flu, and saying it's China's fault that he got sick, like just ridiculous stuff. And, I think it reaches this saturation point. And not to belabor this point, because I really don't want to talk about him anymore because he is an awful person, but not to get too political, but that we've come to a point where we're trying to recalibrate somewhat more back to normal, right? I think the Biden administration has done an incredible job of having a very diverse group of cabinet members and leaders, including not just racial diversity, but also, obviously gender diversity, all sorts of different things, that sort of are trying to drag that needle back to the middle. Nancy, when you said that about talking about Lunar New Year, but saying Gung Hei Fa Choi as like the sort of like the standard, it reminds me of just that sense that we've all felt, and people don't say it explicitly anymore because they know it's like not quite okay to say it, but that Asian people are this sort of monolith, that all Asian people are sort of like the same. And people get the sense, obviously there's different countries in Asia, but they do tend to lump them together. And again, I don't live in New York anymore. I do live in Georgia. I do live in a very diverse part of Georgia, but you do see restaurants that it's like Asian food. Like, that's not a kind of food. Not one Asian food, where it's just, there's this sense that there's this monolithic quality to the ways that we celebrate and the ways that our cultures are formed. And that's just not the case. So I'm looking forward to the Biden administration obviously being very receptive to that and aware of that, given that he does have a very diverse cabinet and group of leaders that he's working with to address the, the multifaceted aspects of Asian culture, including Chinese Americans.
Love that. And I think I'll ask you one more question, and then Aniko, I think we can open up to the audience after this one, which is really around allyship and Chinese Americanness and Asian Americanness and BLM and all the episodes of 2020 post George Floyd's very unfortunate death. What do you see in terms of the current conversation around that as an Asian American, and how do you believe Asian Americans can be better allies in this space, if you feel that way at all? I mean, it may not be something you're looking at or considering, but I'm assuming in university and medicine and in popular culture there are avenues that people do think about this. Yeah, whoever wants to start.
I'll speak to this because I think about this quite a lot. And what I've noticed as someone who works in a field that has marked racial disparities in the ways that we dole out healthcare, and also working in the political space where I see obviously that there's huge issues with social justice relating to race, is that there is also, in addition to societal divides and how people think about this, there's generational divides in how people think about it. And what I've found in speaking with people in my community and at work is that it's the younger Asian Americans and the younger Chinese Americans that are more plugged into these issues of social justice, and that we're really relying on the younger people, the high school students, the college students, the 20-somethings, the millennials, all these people to bring these issues forward, to speak about them in a way that is more current, and to bring our older generation into the fact that it's not an issue of us versus them against this, again, this aspect that I brought up of Asian Americans somehow being separate from these other social justice issues, that this is an issue for all of us. This is an issue that we all need to deal with together, and we're not going to be able to solve these problems unless we as Asian Americans band together with other, ethnic groups and other racial groups, because these are problems that we all have to deal with. So I'm really interested in hearing, especially from some of our younger Hunter alum, in terms of how they've worked in this space to bring in, to clue in their parents a little bit more and their older relatives and older community members into realizing that that we're all in this together. And I've certainly had these conversations with my own parents, and it's not easy, right? But it's very important, and it's part of the work we do.
Jennifer, you want to go?
Yeah, I mean, just from a creative perspective, one thing that I've noticed, I produce documentary films, and that sort of sits adjacent to the feature film, so fiction films basically. And what's one of the interesting things is that Asian American women are punch way above like the numbers, they're just sort of like general populations in independent film in terms of just being producers. And actually a lot of sort of the kind of flashy like sort of Black films or African American films. This often, if you look through the credits, there's often an Asian American producer in there. So one that just comes to mind with one of my friends did Sorry to Bother You, and Nina Yang Bong Jovi is one of the producers there. She also, I think, just did Passing, which is a film that just premiered at Sundance this year about two light-skinned Black women in the 1920s, who, one who chooses to pass as white and one who doesn't, and sort of the tragic, sort of their relationship and the tragic ending. And it's based actually on a novel from, I think, about 1929 of the same name. And I've always really been fascinated by the fact that there's so many Asian American, and specifically Asian American female producers, and like involved in like bringing independent voices to, to mainstream cinema. And I do think there's something about how the generation that we grew up in is very attuned to this sort of, like, at least in the arts perspective, the social justice bent, and the way that has sort of manifested itself in at least in film, is kind of bringing a lot of these projects to market. And like sort of, like speaking for ourselves in terms of publishing, one of the big projects that I'm working on is a Black speculative fiction, so sci-fi and fantasy collection that we've commissioned and brought out, that we're working with Amazon to bring out to the world with a lot of the sort of brand name authors in that space. And it was interesting. And I have to think, just even though, obviously growing up in New York City, it's very different than like some of my friends who like grew up, who are Chinese American, but like grew up in Iowa or grew up in Louisiana. And so I think there are a lot of kind of cultural issues that are interesting to us from just growing up, the generation that we did, where we did, and surrounded by the people kind of that we were surrounded by. And I don't know if it's at least my part, like a very conscious choice, but it is something that like my worldview informs sort of the creative choices that I make.
Thanks for that, Jennifer. Yeah, Randy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I see this generational kind of gap as well. Definitely, like my daughter and I are both involved in some of the admissions reform efforts here at Hunter, and I seeing her and her students and her classmates talk about these issues, they're really on top of this in a very impressive way. I mean, I think we're in a unique position as Chinese Americans, Asian Americans, of being like really underrepresented in some sectors and really overrepresented in other sectors. And so many of us have like these intersectional kind of identities as well, which kind of make us feel like, okay, well, part of me is, this feels unfair and this feels fair, and it's complicated. But I think if equity helps everyone, and I think that seems like if you have to give up some things, you have to kind of, come to terms with that to get to a better future. That's something that we need to kind of do as allies, is to like fight for everyone. It's in our interests to have a kind of, politicians, as long as can say this better, but yeah.
No, that's great. And let's open up the video. And while we do that, just some, so the Museum of Chinese America, a lot of people come in with assumptions that we are a museum by Chinese for Chinese. And we always need to reframe the experience to say that we're actually a museum by all, for all. And that, the idea of social justice and equity is preeminent in what we're trying to do and the goals of what we're doing. But also, I think the topics that came up around our parents and the differences, and having conversations around things where perhaps, like, my parents didn't tell me to keep my head down, but a lot of other people I know that, parents, well, actually my mother said don't, and my dad said be an accountant, but like, I don't know, kind of a mix, right? But would love to get any questions from the audience, and you can ask them anything. As I said, they said they would answer anything. So you can raise your hand or just say hi, like there, Erica. Like I can see folks, and I saw some Judy's there, Ian. Got some, I see, thank you for the 90 representation. Ooh, wonderful friends here. Peggy Blumenthal, I love you. So anyone would like to ask a
There's
question?
a question in the chat from Ava. Nancy, there's a question
Oh.
in the chat. You want me to read it, or you want to read it?
Got it. I got it. Can you, hunter testing, always been an issue, right? Hunter testing, mayor canceling tests due to too few African-American entrants. I think there's a lot there, actually, if people have been following. Randy, you might know a lot about this because your daughter's there. And there's been some email exchange.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm not totally up on the latest, but I believe the current situation is still that the test has been postponed, but no further decision has been made. And that's not a mayoral question.
Yeah. Any other thoughts? Jennifer, are you thinking about this?
Yeah, I was going to actually say the one that's sort of been most on the radar for me that's sort of similar is that Lowell High School, which is the San Francisco equivalent roughly of like the Hunter-Stuyvesant and then the public magnet school, has essentially canceled its magnetness and is going to a lottery system. San Francisco's Board of Education is a very controversial, I guess, public body at this point for everything from stripping a number of schools of their names to the fact that they're actually being sued by the city of San Francisco for not coming up with a reopening plan. But I think my thoughts are actually very complex because in many cases the folks who go to school like Lowell or Stuyvesant or Hunter, they're not coming from, a number of them are not coming from privileged backgrounds, like immigrant backgrounds, but they come, their families like are, mayor, a number of them are more lower income. And so there's this kind of weird coupling of race and class that I think gets very muddled. And when you start actually looking at some of the folks that go to the schools, the socioeconomic diversity is a lot wider than it looks when you just look at like superficial racial demographics.
Yeah, I mean, Michelle.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, go ahead, Michelle.
This is a great topic. And, at the heart of it, when we talk about admission to schools like Hunter, is that a Hunter education is incredibly valuable, right? Like we all know this, we all went to Hunter. We all maybe didn't appreciate it as much at the time, but we know what an incredible experience it is and what a gift it was for us to be able to attend a school like that, right? So it's right that a lot of people want to go there, and it's right that it's extremely competitive, spot to get. What I think we need to consider when we talk about testing and the things we consider with respect to diversity of our class, all different types of diversity, as Jenny was alluding to, is what the value of that diversity is, right? And I think that oftentimes when we get too zoomed in on it, that we think about like when it's like our kids or our community, that it's like, why should I, should my kid who got this score on the test not get the spot, but then some other kid who didn't get that score? What we have to consider is that there is inherent value in making sure that our classes are diverse, because there is an educational value in having our kids in these diverse environments that you cannot replicate in any other way, right? You cannot learn it from a book. You can't learn it from watching a movie. These are not things that you can be taught didactically, that there is an inherent value in that diversity, and that's something that we have to invest in, right? And investments have costs, right? Anytime you do one thing, you don't do another thing. But I think that we have to decide as a school, as an alumni group, and as a society, what we value, and then to decide to invest in these things. So I think that this push, I know this is a very controversial topic and it's very complex, right? As Jenny and as Randall were alluding to, there's not one right answer to this, but we have to, as a group, really decide like, what is the value of that diversity and how much are we willing to invest in it? And I think it is worth the investment. I think we haven't invested enough in it. As I'm not a recent alumna, right? I graduated in 1995, so that was a long time ago. But even back then, we were having these conversations, and these conversations have only gotten louder and more pertinent as time has gone by. And I think it's time that we talk more seriously about doing something about it.
I mean, that's a great follow-up question from Judy. Do you want to ask your question, Judy?
Sure, thanks. And appreciate that you're all here to just share your thoughts. Just given the recent case, and Harvard was at the heart of it, there was a question around whether their race-based considerations for applicants actually discriminate against Asian Americans. So curious to hear your thoughts as Asian Americans.
I'm gonna let the Harvard folks jump in on this one. You all guys.
So I can speak a little bit to the Harvard case. I think the Biden administration may just have dropped the case against Yale. I think either Yale or Princeton. So I actually did go listen to the testimony in the district court on the Harvard case. And it was actually a very, very strange. It was a strange case for so many different reasons. But one of them was that, in typical like court cases, there's like two sides. There's like whoever the litigator is, and then there's the defendant. This had three and actually almost four sides to the lawsuit. And one of the parties, so you had the people who were suing, and then you had Harvard, and then you had like a student, like sort of like an alumni group, mostly led by Asian Americans that were kind of about a generation and a generation a half ahead of me. I think one of them actually even was a Hunter alum. I think Margaret also went to Hunter. So one of the things is, like, obviously Harvard won that case, and it was interesting one is, there was a lot of analysis of statistics. One of the interesting things was that when you looked at the Asian American alumni numbers, in some ways you could say like, oh, their admissions numbers are much lower. But then when you took into account both sports and legacy, which, rightly or wrongly, we can disagree if, a university should sort of have privileged admissions for children of alumni, but Harvard does, and they're pretty open about it. Then when you adjust for those, the Asian Americans are actually on par, because I think about something like a third, my stats are a little bit off, but like maybe like 20% to a third of people who are admitted come from a couple of pools that are sort of privileged. So, alumni, kind of legacy admissions, and then there's also sports. But what was really interesting, and I don't think this point was privileged or sort of revealed in the court cases, but I know from folks who were involved, because they are at the point where their children are attending Harvard. So it turns out that at least within Harvard, Asian American legacy admissions actually are let in at a greater rate than white legacy admissions. So it was interesting to see all these numbers swirl around. I would say that, Harvard, having been whacked a couple of times before, was very careful in how it designed its admission process so that it kind of privileged, like it could basically get diversity in certain ways without necessarily explicitly focusing on race as race, if that makes sense. And as a result, I think that's one of the reasons that I won at the district court level. And then actually, what we actually resented very much as being part of the Harvard Asian American alumni community was we those who are more like social justice oriented resented being weaponized by whites who are looking for a way to attack affirmative action.
Yeah, I mean, I'm class of 90 at Hunter and 94 at, represent 94 at Harvard. And the kind of demographics of those two schools were pretty similar in my experience back then. That is not what it would be now. The demographics at Harvard is probably similar to now to what it was back then, but Hunter obviously has changed a great deal. So, I mean, I think I'm not as kind of up on this case. I know that there are problems in the kind of in the way that Asian Americans were kind of put into a certain kind of pool on like the interview and on the interview level. But I think that need to be addressed, but I don't think that means you throw out the whole system of like trying to kind of use these broader kind of criteria to create a diverse class, which is, as people were saying earlier, is like so incredibly valuable to have a diverse class for pedagogical and for life reasons, in addition to kind of justice reasons. I have seen a lot of the Harvard Asian American alumni groups come out forcefully in support of Harvard being able to continue to try to create a class that has these kinds of values. That's been in kind of in contradiction to the way that some of the media has been trying to portray this kind of monolithic, like Asian American, like, you know, we're gonna lose this, so we're gonna, like, you know, be against these kinds of policies. I think it's a divided populace.
You know, I love the comments that folks are putting on there. And obviously we've opened up a very large conversation that we should have like a book club gathering about, and just, you know, lay it all out there in some safe space, because I think it's really tricky for us and overall just as a Hunter alumni community to address these issues and the, you know, vast, you know, different journeys that our families have taken for us to actually land at Hunter, and you know, the income differences, the there's just so many layers to this. And I think going back to a point that's come up a bit is, you know, the desire to make sort of Asian Americans this monolith, or Chinese people to be homogenous, when Chinese people are one of the most diverse groups of people in the world. We've only, you know, it's disproportionately represented by a certain portion of China in the United States, but it's a very diverse group of people. And, you know, there's so much here that we can unpack, but, you know, maybe we want to segue in the last few minutes back to the Lunar New Year. You know, for our audience, because you've been so diligent on a Friday after all these Zoom calls all week, I'm giving you two of my favorite recipes in the in the thing for you to. One is by the Red Chef on dumplings, and the other one, oh, did I not send that? Okay, I did. And then the next one is Nomwa, which some of the class of 90 went to, a pan-fried noodle recipe. And I just want to end, and sorry that we had to cut that conversation abruptly, but your favorite dish that's going to make the Golden Ox year so awesome for everybody that will never have any remembrance of the metal rat. What would you recommend to this group to, you know, try to learn besides ketchup? Like, I'm sorry. I'm actually going to make that. I never even bok choy.
I'll send you the recipe.
I'm curious, and we should do a whole nother session on making your dumpling. Okay, Jennifer, start us off. What dish do you insist on, you know, eating during the Lunar New Year?
Oh, that's so interesting. So one of our dirty secrets in my family grew up, we were equal opportunity in terms of dealing with holidays. So we didn't really celebrate Christmas or Chinese New Year, just like as an internal family. We did celebrate actually Thanksgiving by going to, after a couple of years, my mom trying to cook turkey and us all deciding that turkey was actually really dry and flavorless, going to Korean restaurants. So our main holiday tradition is going to eat Korean food for Thanksgiving. But in terms of like a dish that really brings me a sense of joy and a sense of Chineseness, because I actually spent a year in Beijing a year after graduating from college, is a lot of sort of the Western Chinese or Muslim Chinese kind of dishes. So in New York City, if those of you who are still there, there is a chain of noodles, a chain of restaurants, I guess, called Xi'an Famous Food, where the proprietor and his son, or I guess now the son is the main proprietor, Jason Wang, they have actually really elevated and made popular a lot of the dishes like liang pi and I guess it's I don't even know, it's like pulled noodles essentially, and those to me are some of the most like kind of authentic memory bringing backness of China, in part because those dishes are not designed for a Western palate, unlike, you know, General Tso's chicken or like, you know, quote unquote chop suey. And so for me, if I were to celebrate Chinese New Year with, you know, my the sort of like writ large, needed to go to the food at those types of restaurants.
Yeah, and famous foods. I put in the chat.
Yeah.
Randy, pressure. What are you gonna say?
I mean, it's not so adventurous, but I love Dai Bao's.
What do you want? Dabao?
Yeah,
A big bun?
But no, Dai Bao's, the ones with the kind of eggs and the, you know, the sausage stuff inside, and you can eat them for breakfast or for lunch or for dinner. And when my daughter was very young, we wrote a song together that has one of her stuffed animals saying their name and then saying that they love Dai Bao's and please give me some. So.
That's awesome. And you can still get them on takeout. I'm trying to think of the best one. Maybe one of the bakeries would have it, or Shanghai 21, or
Yeah,
just
probably.
Shanghai has Dabao. Yeah, basically it translates to big bun. It's a big white bun. I can imagine like Randy as a 5-year-old getting hong baos all over Chinatown, eating a dabao. Okay, Michelle, what's your favorite food?
I'll tell you what we made for Lunar New Year is we did hot pot. It's one of those things where
Oh,
this is
yes,
another
that's
like
true. Yeah.
COVID story. It's like, that's one of those things that my kids love to go to a restaurant and then like have the pot at their table. And we went to the ones that each have a mini pot. So everyone has their own hot pot and you can put their vegetables in and flavor the soup how you want. And then they saw this was like amazing. Like we can make our own thing. That was so great. Now, obviously we're not doing indoor dining because COVID is happening. In case you haven't noticed, there's this virus going around, not to surprise anyone. So you kind of think, oh, I guess we're not doing hot pot anymore. Then I realized we could do it at home. I did not invest in one of those super fancy, like I didn't go to H Mart and get like the thing with the hot
Wait,
plate.
I have to show you something.
But yeah, I'm sure Jenny has it. Jenny is like all over it. But I was like, you know what? We're just gonna fucking do it. And then we just, I made broth. So this was like the hard part. I made the broth and then I just put it on our stovetop. My kids are old enough now that I don't think they're gonna like die if they have to actually lean over a stovetop. And we just had little pots and they just made their own hot pot in our kitchen. Oh, see, Jenny's got it.
This is a strange. I just saw this at like I guess the equivalent of 99. I'm in Utah. Like I knew the world had changed when there was a big Chinese supermarket that arrived in like Salt Lake City. But this is new. It's a self heating hot pot. So you can bring it like hiking, for example, when you get to the top of the mountain and you can like make hot pot up there. I've never seen it. It's from Heidi Lau. And we haven't used it, but I was just so fascinated by it. I guess you add water and then there's some kind of heating packet and then it just cooks. So now you can like have hot pot on the go, apparently.
See, that's so good. I had to make my own soup like a sucker. So anyway, we did that for Chinese New Year. I would recommend that. I think people should try it. Go out of your comfort zone, do this thing. But the thing I do miss is, and this is not like a Chinese New Year food as such, but it is a Chinese food, is zhong, you know, like with the glutinous rice wrapped in the lotus leaf and with all the sausage and the egg and everything in there. Because, you know, I live in Georgia. I do live in a part of Georgia that has a lot of Asian people and Chinese people. I cannot find it. I think it's like it's like a specialty item. And I've gone to H Mart. Everyone's like, you got to go to this special place. And this lady makes it. I don't know what they're talking about. I don't know what street they're talking about. I can't find it. So if anyone knows a place in Georgia, north of Atlanta, that sells zhong, tell me and send me the Google link to the map. Don't tell me words behind this store where there's this. Don't tell me that.
I can give you a good recipe, Michelle, but maybe you're too busy.
No, I want to just buy the thing and eat the thing.
Okay.
I don't want to make a thing. But anyway, that's what I miss.
And I'm going to share my last one as we have 30 seconds left. And since it's been in the age of COVID, I'm going to share a mixed drink. It's called a cocktail. And I just coined it today. It's called the Hong Bao. And actually, if you want to join the Tiger restaurant, which is on Center Street next to the museum, Eddie Buckingham and Jeff Lamb, they're mixologists and the owners of the Tiger, which is an amazing fusion restaurant. But they're going to make the Hong Bao cocktail, which they just created for this purpose. So that's Monday, because you start the week off early at 4:00. So join us.
What's in it though? You have to say what's.
Oh, it's great. It's baijiu. So white wine. There's a recipe. I put the link there. It's quite involved, but it's a tequila, baijiu, lime juice, red wine, some if you want to use egg white, and whole raspberries. And then it's garnished with a edible gold leaf. But you know, that's only if you have extra Hong Bao money. But it's going to be a great fortune the whole year. And also, if anyone's super bored next Friday. My mother is a published chef for a couple of her recipes, and she's making tang yuan, which is my favorite, which is usually for the Lantern Festival. It's a white, it's a rice flour, and inside is either black sesame, peanut paste, or red bean paste. So we'll be making that, and it's like the only Chinese official dessert I think that exists. But most importantly, thank you, Aniko, for organizing this. Thank you to the amazing classmate Randall Eng. I always like to say Randy, that's not appropriate for professional circumstances. Dr. Senator Michelle Au and the amazing Jennifer Aitley. You got to follow all her cool stuff. And she has a really good social media platform, so definitely look for her. And to all of you, 新年快乐，恭喜发财，恭喜发财, and have a great year of the ox. Thank you for coming out.
And thank you so much for Nancy for pulling it together in the very last minute and making my life so easy, leading the whole discussion and asking fabulous questions. And again, thank you for everyone for coming out and join us for other events, and happy New Year.
Thank you. Have a good year. Bye, Erica.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.